immense pleasure in welcoming Prof Amartya Sen on behalf of the University of Hyderabad and also on my personal behalf today. And to this audience, Prof Amartya Sen does not need an introduction, but it is my duty to welcome Prof Amartya Sen and also mention that briefly his professional biography. Prof Amartya Sen is currently Thomas Lamont University Professor and Professor of Economics and Philosophy at Harvard University. And until 2004, he held the position of Master of Trinity College, Cambridge. Prof Sen is also Chancellor and Chairman of the Governing Board of Nalanda University. He is a Senior Fellow at Harvard Society of Fellows. Earlier on, he was Professor of Economics at Jadavpur University, Calcutta, Delhi School of Economics, and London School of Economics, and Drummond Professor of Political Economy at Oxford University. Professor Sen, your contributions encompass several disciplines in social sciences and philosophy. Professor Sen, you are a role model for most of us, for all of us here, and we are privileged to have you over here today and to honor you with our honoris causa. I request Mr. Ramaswamy to read the citation.
Professor Sen, in 1993, the University of Hyderabad conferred upon you the honorary degree of Doctor of Literature, honoris causa. At that time, the School of Social Sciences nominated you for this award, and the university was very pleased to grant you this award. On the 13th convocation of the university that was held on the 1st of October 2011, we conferred the honorary doctorate degree in literature honoris causa on you in absentia. The university is very grateful to you for having come here today so that we can present this degree in person 20 years after we had initially awarded it to you. Professor Sen, you are one of the most significant economists of our age and an outstanding voice for justice in the world today. You have greatly improved our understanding of the causes of hunger and famine in the world. Born in 1933 on the campus of Vishwabharati University at Shantiniketan, you completed the first degree in 1953 as a student at Presidency College, Calcutta. At Trinity College, Cambridge, you earned the PhD in economics and were appointed Professor of Economics at Jadavpur University at the age of 23. In 1963, you moved to the Delhi School of Economics, where you stayed till 1971. During those years, you developed the seminal work on social choice theory, leading to the publication of a path-breaking book, Collective Choice in Social Welfare, which deals with the relationship between individual preferences and their aggregation into collective preferences. By opening up a new field within the theory of social choice, you demonstrated how the possibility of identifying consistent social preferences is affected by the assumptions we make about interpersonal comparison. You then moved to London, where you taught at the London School of Economics. In 1977, you were appointed Professor of Economics at Oxford University, and in 1980, Drummond Professor of Political Economy at Oxford. In these years, your work in the field of welfare economics, dealing with issues including the assessment of poverty, the evaluation of inequality, the measurement of national income, unemployment, questions of personal liberty and rights, and gender inequality culminated in the book Resources, Values and Development. Your concern for the problems of inequality and your dissatisfaction with mainstream analysis to deal with it prompted your observation that almost single-minded concern of modern welfare economics does not make that engaging branch of study particularly suitable for investigating problems of inequality. From the mid-1970s, you pursued work on the causes and prevention of famine, which produced, among other things, the classic book, Poverty and Famines. From the mid-1980s, your work became increasingly directed to the nature of individual advantage, which you approach from the point of view of understanding personal ability, which depends on physical and mental characteristics as well as on social opportunities. At the end of the 80s, you took up professorship at Harvard University and remained there till 98, when you became Master of Trinity College, Cambridge. In the same year, you were awarded the Nobel Prize for Economics. In 2004, you returned to Harvard and held the position of Lamont University Professor and Professor of Economics and Philosophy. Your book, Development as Freedom, brought social and economic ideas to a wider, non-specialist audience. Professor Sen, you are an intellectual giant whose works and concerns are on issues that range well beyond economics. Your book of literary essays, The Argumentative Indian, bears testimony to this. Your use of part of the Nobel Award to establish the Pratichi Trust, which works in the field of literacy, basic healthcare, and gender equity in our country and Bangladesh, is laudable. It is fortunate that a scholar of your vision and stature has entirely explored the possibilities of making this world a better place. And we at the University of Hyderabad applaud your efforts. Sir, the University of Hyderabad is honored to confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Literature, honoris causa, with all the rights and privileges pertaining thereunto.
Chancellor of the University to present degree certificate and academic votes to Prof Amartya Sen. I now request Prof Amartya Sen to give his acceptance speech.
I'm obviously very moved, very touched, immensely proud, and feel extremely privileged to have this connection in this wonderful form with the University of Hyderabad. And I think since I'm giving a lecture later, I think trying to do an acceptance speech would be a bit difficult. I know that Hyderabad University has spoiled me by giving me the degree repeatedly until 93. Now, I don't think it should be retaliated by repeated speeches. So I would just thank the Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor, and for every one of you present here. I'm especially thrilled to see my old friend, Professor Priya Rao, here. We have been friends for a very long time. And absolutely thrilled by the achievements there. So I'm very pleased that I'm getting this degree. Thank you very much.
Now we move on to the next part of this program. And as part of this program, Prof Amartya Sen will deliver the first Hyderabad lecture in the Hyderabad Lecture Series. And I request Professor Ramakrishna Ramaswamy to mention about a few words about the lecture series, Hyderabad Lecture Series.
Friends, I'm very pleased today that Professor Amartya Sen has kindly consented to give the first Hyderabad lecture, an important, and I hope an important series of lectures for that has been conceptualized in the city of Hyderabad, and something that we hope will contribute to the intellectual life of the city. Let me give a little background. Several people at different institutions in the city of Hyderabad have mentioned the need for some kind of intellectual life for the city, and based on these conversations with a variety of people, we thought up of having the following kind of format. A certain amount of money that could be set aside every year for conducting these lectures and to have the person contribute to the intellectual life of the city by bringing issues and concerns that are of contemporary interest. And these lectures are to be delivered not just at the University of Hyderabad, but at other locations in the city, particularly on the campuses of other universities and other public institutions. About 2 years ago, I wrote to the then chairman of the Insurance Regulatory and Development Agency, the IRDA, and made the proposal that the IRDA could, along with the University of Hyderabad, sponsor such a Hyderabad Lectures. And I'm very pleased to announce today that the chairman of IRDA is here with us, and I'm not actually sure where, but yeah, Mr. Vijayan is here with us, and the IRDA has decided to endow the university with a corpus which will now fund in perpetuity the Hyderabad Lecture Series, where we'll be able to bring intellectuals from any part of the world to contribute to the life of the city of Hyderabad. The university is particularly grateful to IRDA for having been so generous in this and enabled us to have this lecture series. Of course, we have started now with a very high bar. Professor Amartya Sen, is as the first of the lecturers at this particular series. I think that we know that we have a treat in store for us, because every year we will have to at least try to match this. Okay. Let me conclude now by just by thanking IRDA for enabling not just the university but the entire city to have this kind of series, and we look forward to more such interactions with other agencies from time to time. Thank you very much.
I think the way I should proceed is first to say a few words on the subject. I think I'll divide this. We don't have very much time for this evening because there is a number of events that have already occurred, and I would like to have some time for Q&A, and we would like to have to finish up by 6. So I'll be speaking hopefully for about half an hour and divide it into 3 parts. I'll first say something basically about the subject, maybe coffee houses and education. Then a little bit I take the liberty of saying something about my own experiences and how that connection may be important to me. And then finally try to say something about contemporary India and how the issues that I'm trying to discuss in this relate to the future of contemporary India. Obviously when we talk about coffee house being important for education, we couldn't possibly mean education at every level, primary, secondary, etc. The topic that is mainly about higher education. It has a particular role in higher education. It can have also in school education, but that becomes a more particular, it depends very much on circumstances. Coffee house as a concept is the importance of having dialogue and discussion, because coffee house is a place where that actually happens. You get an opportunity of getting away from your class and you talk with others, and you have an opportunity to talk about issues that concern you. That could include the kind of issues that are being brought up now, namely the plight of the neglected and maltreated part of the Indian population over thousands of years, which include Dalits. Not only Dalits, also include scheduled tribes in a very big way, and their deprivation is sometimes even larger than that of the Dalits, as our book on An Uncertain Glory brings out. Now, I think the issue here is this, that having chosen to live in a democracy as we have in India, if only implicitly, by remaining like I have an Indian citizen, as I am, though I teach in America, I remain exclusively an Indian citizen, I accept the democratic prerogative that the way to bring about a change is through discussion, persuasion, and ultimately voting, as well as demanding action, which can include agitation in the street. I've been involved in food, right to food agitation. I've been involved in minority rights agitation. I have actually also been involved in Dalit-centered agitation. It's a bigger issue in some parts of India than at other parts. And I can see that this could become a very big issue if I lived somewhere else rather than Shantiniketan or Calcutta and so on. On the other hand, it's an issue even in Calcutta, there's no question about that. I think the one thing is this, that in order to bring about a change, one has to present arguments rather than preventing other people from speaking. And if I may say that, because I say that with some sense of hurt, because I see myself on the side of Dalit agitation. And all it does here is to try to, in this case what happened was try to prevent me from speaking on some other subject. And as I mentioned, I would have been very, very happy to talk about the Dalit situation in India, on which we have done a fair amount of research over the years, and the situation is quite terrible. I don't know anything about the circumstances, about the particular event here. Now, I think the point about Coffee House was to argue that our attitudes are formed in our college days quite often about what are we going to focus on in our life, whether we are going to lead our life in pursuit of those things in which we might be able to earn a high income, lead a life not only of comfort but also of luxury, and India offers enormous opportunities of that. If there are convictions to be formed about the need for social commitment, that's most likely to come in terms of, first of all, in the days when one is a young student studying in college. It also begins in school, but ultimately it functions best most in the college situation. And also, at that time, it's not so much you will get that in the class, but the coffee house, and by coffee house I mean a place where you can sit down with others and talk and try to persuade them of your position and expect that it will have some kind of an effect on their lives. And certainly in my own life, I was going to, when I was interrupted in terms of from the shouting that took place, I was saying I was hoping to speak about three parts. One is about the nature of coffee house and engagement, and I think that, given the time and given the spirit at this moment, I think is probably dispensable. Second was something to talk about my own life and how my own attitude, including my inclination to involve in agitation, not quite of this kind, but agitation of similar kind, where I have argued for people's right to food, people die of hunger, people suffer from major undernourishment in India, the quality. I mean, I have had an opportunity of being a school teacher, even when I was myself finishing my own school in Shantiniketan. We used to run a night school. And one of the remarkable things that comes through is how the ability of the children that we were trying to teach as an additional effort in our own school days. I mean, I was in very higher level, and I was about to move to Presidential College. But it was quite remarkable for me to see that how the inability to pay attention is related to the hunger of the people who came to school. And that was later when I was lucky to get some money from the Nobel Foundation. I I had this opportunity to use that money to start 2 trusts, one in India and one in Bangladesh, dealing with elementary schooling, elementary healthcare, and inequality, including between upper and lower classes, upper and lower caste, special attention to Dalit, as well as between men and women, and especially the neglect of young girls. Now, in that context, the Fertility Trust India had done a lot of research in a survey kind, and it's quite clear that large number of people's ability to, our attention was concentrated mostly on East India, Bengal, West Bengal, Jharkhand, Bihar, and in a small way some of the other states in the East as well. But it was quite striking that the deprivation of food is a factor that not only ruins people's health, it also ruins people's education. My friend James Heckman, who is a professor at Chicago, who also got the Nobel Prize actually about, I think, 6-7 years after me, he had done serious study about how undernourishment of the children and lack of care of the children at very early age reduces the development of cognitive ability, brain development, and their ability to lead a decent life and imbibe the opportunities of education that are offered, and then lead the life of a full citizen. So in order to deal with the problems of inequalities in India, we need understanding of the source of these problems. And the sources are diverse. There's, of course, old prejudice, and caste prejudice is a very big one. The prejudice against tribal people is a very strong one, too. And in some areas, it could be, certainly in the belt surrounding a part of West Bengal, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, part of Bihar. These have been very big factors. In addition to prejudice, there are the purely economic issues about inability to earn an income, to have food, to be able to be disease-free in terms of undernourishment diseases are concerned. But on top of that, the lack of health care, which is abysmal in India, also makes people much more prone to illnesses of various kinds. I think the reason why I think the Dalit agitation, if it is carried out in a well thought out manner, is important, is because agitation in an orderly way, not necessarily stopping other people from speaking, but actually having your own say and asking others who may or may not be Dalit themselves to join you in this. You need a persuasive power, and that persuasive power comes from understanding, of which there are 2 parts: knowing the facts and reasoning about them. Critical faculty is very important too. Now, I think if I were to give the speech in coffee houses, which I was going to give, which I'm not now, I would have discussed how our power to reason about general subjects, not what we are studying, in our own way, whether it be high-level philosophy or financial economics or cosmology or low-temperature physics. Not just those, but things that students have reason to talk with each other. I've never taken the view that students shouldn't have a political view. I had clear political views, but I also like to listen to others who have different political views. In my days, since I was on the left of the political spectrum, one of the big issues was the marrying of a strong left-wing position with the acceptance of the democratic norms. That was the big thing. People may not remember, some people may remember, C.R. Rao might remember, that there was a time when in Calcutta, democracy was often described as bourgeois democracy, as if there's nothing in it. Now that position no one takes, no one in the left takes now, today. But that wasn't won without any battle. There had to be a debate on that. There had to be a debate among people who were active in the student movement, as I was. And often some of these debates take place in coffee houses, why democracy is important, and why the fact that the Soviet Union, despite its major achievements in basic education being spread across the country, which Rabindranath Tagore praised enormously when he visited Russia in his book called Russia Chithi in Bengali, Letters from Russia. And that was actually banned by the British government. And interestingly enough, it wasn't republished, it wasn't published until after independence. So that was a high praise of the Soviet Union in education and about healthcare. And yet, there was somehow the Soviet Union also produced gulags and a lot of terrorizing realities and ultimately collapsed under its own weight. So that was a nature of an argument there, namely that democracy is needed, though the temptation to go in some other ways could be strong. Democracy is needed ultimately to have a solid system of equity without undermining yourself in different kind of inequities that may not be within your horizon. You might be thinking about the illiterate, about the hungry, but then there are also the political prisoners, the minorities who are discriminated against, people who are taken in the absence of habeas corpus, taken to jail and not allowed to move the law. All those issues have to be discussed. So these were among the issues that we were discussing greatly, even as the left-wing parties in India were moving from, there are many anti-democratic left-wing parties even today, but the mainstream left-wing parties, by and large, moved out of that to a pro-democracy position, being a full partner of in the election that resulted. I think that was one of the issues. Also, the issue that one of the questions that often came up was the importance of judging economic progress, whether we judge it by economic growth, which was the standard way of doing about it. Later, I would write on it, and I would help my friend Mahbub al-Haq to start the Human Development Report, including having a hand in making the Human Development Index. But those discussions actually started not so much in Calcutta, where my main partners were people like Professor Sukumar Chakravarti, probably the strongest influence on me in my student days in Calcutta. But when I was in Cambridge later, I met Mahbub al-Haq on my first day's arrival, and we talked a lot about what ultimately became human development. We were quite young students then, but we were discussing, and I remember one conversation where Mahbub al-Haq told me, judging things by GDP, he said, look, if India and Pakistan have the same rate of growth as the maximum that's being achieved at this time anywhere in the world, then in 40 years' time, our per capita income would be similar to that of Egypt. Would that be what would be regarded as a great achievement over more than a generation? Now, I should explain that Mahbub wasn't anti-Egyptian. He was just pointing out that there are better things we can do, even with low income. We could get everyone fed, we could get everyone taken care of in terms of health care, we can get 100% immunization, which India still doesn't have, only about 60%. Bangladesh has close to 100%, we don't. And there are issues that we can take up. Unfortunately, the engagement has been limited in India, and that's the subject matter of my joint book with Jean Drèze, An Uncertain Glory, and as to how those things we could have done, we didn't do. First, when India's growth rate was low, when the Indian economy became independent, people don't actually recognize how low the growth rate was at that time. Immediately after independence, India was growing at 3.5% per year, and everyone complained that it was too low. It was too low. On the other hand, what was it following? It was 200 years of virtually no growth at all. We don't have data from the whole period, but we do know that Adam Smith in 1776 thought that India was one of the richer economies in the world. He knew mostly about Bengal, and he compared favorably the living standard in Bengal compared with that in Europe. And he asked the question, how come these areas are so rich? And he attributed, and not without reason, that they have gone into trade, and the rivers, the Indo-Gangetic channels, had helped in that. Didn't know so much about the south, so Narmada and Krishna and Kaveri didn't figure in that, but similar argument could have been made. But by the time the British were leaving, India was one of the poorest countries. We don't have growth rate for the whole period, but we do know in the first half of the 20th century, the growth rate of India GDP per capita was 0.1% a year, which is virtually zero. And that was for a 50-year period preceding independence. So the 3.5% after growth, after India's independence, was a big jump up, even though it couldn't look like that compared with other countries. And as compared with India later, gradually the growth rate moved up, became 5%, 6%, 7, 8, even 8.5%. Now it's come down, but even now India's growth rate, 4.5%, 5%, is among the higher growth rates in the world. It can be raised a lot more, and we have to ask why not? What's preventing it? On the other hand, when these growth rates take place, what happens? Now, I'm going to quote Adam Smith again from 1776. He's asking, why do we want a good political economy and a good expansion of the economy? And he gives an answer. We need it for two reasons. One, it raises people's income, which allows them to do what they would like to do, have a better standard of living, having greater capability. In fact, even though I'm often given credit for developing the idea of capability, many of the ideas go back to Adam Smith. And so we have that. And secondly, he said, the second object is that by high growth, when there's high growth rate, the public revenue increases fast. And that allows the state to do those things well, which only the state can do well. And he talked about the need for education for all. Didn't talk so much about healthcare, but it's quite clear from his reading that book in the context of his earlier book, Theory of Moral Sentiment, that he was also concerned about healthcare for all. Now, the resources could go in that direction. Unfortunately, in India, this didn't happen. When India's growth rate was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9%, the public revenue was going in 9, 10, 11, 12%. But the channeling didn't go in that direction. It went much more towards subsidizing, to some extent, already privileged consumers, not so much compared with the poorest of the poor. They were now, they're privileged compared with the poorest of the poor, but not compared with the others who are much richer. So it's something like the bottom 20% of the top 20%. Take the top 20% of the population and take the bottom 20% of that top 20%. That got itself portrayed as the poor, the ordinary people whose interests have to be neglected. So you do fuel subsidy, kerosene subsidy, power subsidy. India's electricity, India spends about 2% of GDP on power subsidy, even though 1/3 of the population of the country don't have electric connections at all. And it's absolutely remarkable. When a year earlier, a bit over a year earlier in July, the power grid failed in the north, in a large part of India, everyone said 600 million people were plunged into darkness. certainly true, 600 million people did have darkness. But of these 200 million people never had any electric connection at all. That didn't get any kind of media attention. On the other hand, the enormous failure for those who had the power and used to cheap subsidized power did. There's tremendous complaint about food security bill. And there are many ways that the food security bill could have been much better produced. I don't doubt that at all. But on the subject that we can't afford it, it's worth noting that we spend much more on subsidizing power for those who have electric connection than we do on food security. It's quite a remarkable thing how the media and the dialogue has left company with the factual reality of India. And why does that happen? What's the remedy? The remedy isn't not to make the media do certain things. That is the worst remedy to think of. It's one of the glories of India that we have a free media. It has to be something of the nature of the interest of the media to cover these issues. And ultimately, the media believe that people are interested in the issue. So if you don't discuss the issue, then they will never come. Coffee house, if it fits into the story at all, I'm not giving a lecture on coffee house, I'll remind you, even though I'm referring to the word coffee house from time to time. That's an illusion. So it's not a lecture on coffee house. But coffee house is one of the places where this kind of discussion can take place. And I remember being enormously moved. I mentioned Sukumar Chakravarti was a big influence on my life. Actually, I was doing physics, maths and physics when I first met him. Came to Shantiniketan, I was in school, and I was keen on doing physics. I think I might have been quite happy in physics anyway. But after some conversations with Sukumar, I got really inspired and wanted to do economics and join him, which I did. And he was a very close friend. And I think I spent more hours with Sukumar in the coffee house in Calcutta than with anyone else. Again, I remind you, it's not a lecture on coffee house that I'm giving. This is just an incidental, relevant reference to it. Now, when I first met him, he was visiting Shantiniketan. We don't have coffee houses in Shantiniketan, but we can sit down somewhere on the ground. I can't do it now with my leg situation, with titanium instead of knees. It's difficult, but in those days I could. So we sat, and I took Sukumar to a colored dokan, which provided some coffee. And we chatted and argued. And this continued in Presidency College. And then I had similar conversations with Mahbubul Haq in Cambridge, in the WIM, which is a coffee place. And quite a lot of the Human Development Index was actually developed there, talking about it when both of us were advanced undergraduates. So I think the importance of having public discussion in all kinds of forums is really important, and it's really great. And universities can do something about that to encourage it. Now, coffee house is a place where not only you have coffee, but you can actually chat. Very important not to have any music, because that makes it very difficult to chat. And it's also very important that you're not evicted. If you've just had one cup of coffee on grounds that after 20 minutes you have to go, I think a good coffee house is one which would allow you to sit there and chat. And I think I had a sense, the coffee house we had in Calcutta, we were very lucky. It was run by the coffee workers union. It was the workers union which ran it. So they had a certain amount of sympathy on the subject that we were discussing. So we were hardly ever evicted. Every now and then, maybe a gentle suggestion that we might have some, if not coffee, at least a bhaji or something like that. I think we ended, quite often my attitudes were formed in these discussions. I was doing some economics too, and so was Sukumar, so were others like Varun Dev, Patu Gupta, and a number of them. Most of them are dead now. But the opportunity to discuss really serious issues, grumble about what people are not doing, not just grumble at the government, but also about political parties, in many ways, the left party seemed a natural one for me to be sympathetic to. They were concerned with inequality. They were concerned with the Dalit issue. Not adequately to start with, but gradually they became more interested. They were interested in scheduled tribes. And all these still required one to ask, do they have a right attitude to democracy? Do they have enough respect for human rights? Are they factually really aware? Do we get a really frank picture of what's going on in the Soviet Union and China from them? And if not, why not? All these are subjects of discussion. And I think this is a really serious issue today, because if you look at India today, you find that there is a reality which doesn't match people's perception. We're told, for example, that the government is overextended here, and it's doing no good, and it should be privatized if possible. A lot of people will tell you that. Now, certainly government had been overextended in doing things which it couldn't do well, like licensing and preventing individual initiative, or even business initiative. I have great sympathy for reform. At the same time, it was very underactive in education and healthcare. India spends 1.2% of the GNP on of the GDP on governmental healthcare. China spends close to 3%. If you look at the share of government expenditure in total health expenditure in different countries, India is, of the 200 or so countries, is among the bottom 3 or 4, in the company of Haiti and Sierra Leone. Why? But even before that, is that perception clear? You'll be told, no, the government is doing far too much, we have to privatize it. And in fact, that's what we have done, because basically the poor, because the public health clinics are run so badly, and the Patichi Trust, which I was privileged to set up with my Nobel money, we did survey some of them, are very often badly manned, very badly resourced, very badly provided with amenities and medicine and medical instruments. And so people have to go to private health care often. Now, one of the things we know from economics is that private sector can deliver health care very badly indeed for very poor people if there is no alternative of the state. Why? Because we know from economics, this is what the economists call asymmetric information. 3 people got the Nobel on that subject many years later, George Akerlof, Joe Stiglitz, and Michael Spence. This is because the buyer knows something which the seller doesn't, and seller knows something the buyer doesn't. Now, when a poor peasant is ill, he or she has no idea what the ailment is. A doctor is supposed to have an idea. So there's an asymmetric information. And in that kind of a situation, in a classic paper, one of the great economists of our time, Kenneth Arrow, showed why the private sector cannot provide efficient health care under these circumstances ever. And the result is that you have to have expansion of state-provided health care. That every country in the world has done. Europe, and even if the Americans only now are talking about Obamacare, they provided basic epidemiology. There was no question of incomplete immunization as in India. And even the hospital, public hospitals, like Harvard Medical School hospitals, they couldn't turn anyone away if they needed it. Now, it's a very inexpensive way of providing health care, and it's not a good system. On the other hand, it does accept a responsibility which in India is not accepted. In Europe, of course, it's accepted in a big way with the National Health Service. So it is in Japan, so it is in Korea, so it is in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, which has a completely universal health insurance, and in China. They vacillated for a while after the economic reform of '79, but now they're back to nearly full coverage. So I think the perception that India is way out in government not doing its job is very important. Now, sometimes people would say that's because the government cannot do anything in India. Why can't it do anything in India when it can in every other country? And if not, rather than just saying, let us therefore give it over to the private sector, which of course is a way of, in the case of the basic public health care among the rural population, is to give it in the hands of people who may or may not have much medicine anyway, and who certainly can count money. And the result could be an absolutely disastrous system of healthcare as we have. In Bangladesh, which used to be 3 years behind us in healthcare, in life expectancy, is now 3 years ahead. This is partly connected with the fact that they had done, to a great extent with the help of NGOs, but also government activism more, and certainly, and that's a very important point, by women's agency. Bangladesh's the medical success, on which I was privileged to write an article in the medical journal Lancet in the current number, in the December number. It turns out that it's really enormously the activism of the women which has made this possible. The proportion of women actively engaged in employment, industrial, educational, medical, are enormously lower in India than in Bangladesh. Makes a big difference. So we have to see about the delivery issue. If you look at India, Kerala began basic education for all and then basic health care for all. When I wrote supportive things on it in 1950s and 60s mostly, I was told that Kerala had doing something which it cannot sustain. It's a poor economy. And since it's a poor economy, it's unaffordable. But the argument was, and that argument actually also goes back to Adam Smith, that there's nothing as important for economic expansion as healthy and educated workforce. So the hope was that Kerala would grow faster, and indeed it is. And instead of being a poor economy, it has now the highest per capita disposable income among all the Indian states. To some extent, the same thing has happened in Tamil Nadu. Same thing has happened in Himachal Pradesh. And these are stories that you won't hear, actually. Why not? Why doesn't the media take an interest in it? And why doesn't the public want to hear it? So the culture of public discussion of really important social matters is quite central. The story of the Asian economic development, which India has missed out, is not only a governmental missing out. It is also a public missing out of the reality of it. What is the story? Europe and America had already done it on the basis of governmental initiatives. But when Japan in Asia, after Meiji Restoration in 1860s, decided to go in that direction, their first thing was to educate everyone in the country. And as one of the leaders, I think Hide Kiyobashi said, that this is 1869, I think, that we Japanese and Americans are no different. They are much more productive than us, mainly because they are educated and we are not. So they decided immediately to go for 100% literacy, and within 45 years they achieved that. And by 1913, Japan was publishing more books than, not only publishing more books than any other country in the world, but more than twice as many books as the United States. And similarly, a transformation took place in healthcare. Rabindranath Tagore, again, when he went to Japan, noticed these changes and came away with an enormous sense of admiration. But of course, just as the Soviet Union, lack of democracy created a big problem. In Japan, imperialism created a problem. And then there was a war, and then it went in a completely an ultra-nationalist direction. But the lesson of Japan stayed on. Korea, immediately after the war, went for massive expansion of education, healthcare. Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, and China going through periods of turmoil. The Maoist, Mao himself was quite committed to education and healthcare. On the other hand, he was neglecting the market economy, which has a very important role in the progress of an economy. We shouldn't make the mistake of assuming that the market doesn't do any great things. It does do great things. But it had to be confined to its sphere. And where the state and state alone can do it, as Adam Smith put it, there the state has to use the public revenue for that purpose. That's the dialogue which we want. Why is it that we have missed out on the Asian story of development, which is that of development through human capability expansion? Now, I shouldn't go on, and I was hoping that there might be Q&A, but we have lost a certain amount of time, so I'm not sure how much Q&A we could have, but I don't want to deliver the lecture, as I said on the coffee house, that I was going to deliver. But I wanted to say in the last part of the lecture, I would have gone into this, so I decided to, we have this lovely word, prepone as opposed to postpone, so I prepone that. But I think the other items won't come in. But I would say that the importance of people talking to each other on serious matters, and it's best begun in college, is really extraordinarily important. Now, there is an elitism element because there's not everyone goes to college in India or any other country, but these people are really very important also. I mean, I am in favor of mass movement, always been. And yet, there is no question that college education and college-educated people have a special responsibility. Their responsibility is not only to do your IT well or business management well. The responsibility is also to do social thinking well. Take note of the information, don't suppress the information, be curious about the information so that the newspapers are in some ways obliged to supply them. Rather than, I had said in one of the interviews I gave, I think in Chennai, that the newspapers seem far less interested in education and healthcare, which is a great fitting. They're much more interested in the film world and as to which of the three Khans are the greatest. And then the 2 days after that, I opened the thing and I see the headline, which is a very nice headline for me. It says, Amir Khan back Sen. And Amir Khan said he completely agrees that we should discuss. Now that I've got Amir Khan's support, I think I'm an easy wicket now. But Amir Khan is right. I support him, that we ought to talk about education and healthcare. We ought to demand the media provide this kind of information and be criticized for not doing it. There is nothing wrong in being interested in Indian film or music. I was very privileged to release a wonderful new book on Carnatic music by Vidwan S.M. Krishna, The Carnatic Story. It's a beautiful book. Do recommend it strongly. We have every reason, and of course we discussed also how Carnatic music could be not confined, as it has traditionally been, to the upper caste, to the Brahmins, to the men, and so on, as consumers, but to all. All that has to go on, but yet also the basics, education, healthcare. We have to constantly demand information on that, fault newspapers for not providing it, and lead the dialogue so that when we praise which state is doing how well, we don't fall for the temptation to praise achievements which are not really shown in terms of the numbers at all, but which is carried on in a story, in a kind of myth that everyone says that this state is doing enormously better than any other state. Now, I'm not going to mention it. The moment I mention it, in case there's a newspaper, I would read that Amartya Sen attacks Modi again. So I'm not going to talk about that. But the fact is that there's from the translation of among the top 5 states in per capita income now, if it is Kerala and Himachal Pradesh and Tamil Nadu who had followed this policy and were very much poorer at one stage, there has to be some lesson to be learned from there, rather than saying that if Maharashtra has 8.1% growth rate and Gujarat has 8.2% growth rate, then Gujarat is a super performer in terms of growth rate. And if Bihar is 10.5, then we somehow neglect that. So I think there's an absolute necessity. I'm not arguing for one particular position or not. I mean, that I will as a voter when the election times come. But in terms of advocacy, I would say that we have to discuss all those issues. And I would now end with this remark. The Dalit issue is very central, not just here in this city, in this university, but in this country generally. And there is a serious message and a serious engagement, and that's one of the things that Ambedkar said, which we quote, which is really kind of motto for my last book, namely, educate, organize, agitate. Education is quite important. And for that, disrupting lectures is not a very good method of doing it. And Ambedkar never made a mistake on that. Educate, organize, agitate. It's that combination that we want. And I think people talking with each other, coffee house may be a frivolous way of introducing the subject, but ultimately it's our ability to talk to each other on serious subjects which makes all the difference in the world. Thank you.
On behalf of all of us, thank you so much for this wonderful lecture, and especially for doing it in circumstances. There is time. Professor Sen has agreed for a short question-answer session. Earlier it was to have been a longer one, but I think a shorter one would be quite appropriate now. So could I take the first 5 questions?
Sir, like, how is professional equality related to the progress of a nation? Here, I mean, professional equality means, suppose we have different professions, like if you take sports, scientific area of research, and politics, like if it's taken as a profession, and some different professions. Like, how is professional equality? Different members, topmost members of those professions treated, if they are treated equally, how the country or the nation would progress, or if they are not treated equally, how the country will be like. What is its position? How far is it good?
My question pertains to the fact that throughout your lecture you referred to 2 words, dialoguing and debating. And dialoguing indicates 2 people or more than 2 people, and debating, of course, there's an assertion of one. And then I want to juxtapose this to the title of your very famous book, Argumentative. And the strain of all these 3 terms, what do you think would be most appropriate at this point in time, historical time, for us? What would be most appropriate a term, you know, argumentative, debate? Because today's lecture you never use the word argumentative, and you use much more dialoguing. I found that much more. But you also constantly refer to debating. So at this historical point in time in our country, what do you think, which of these words you think would be most appropriate for us to engage with?
In India there are different caste systems.
Different?
Castes.
Caste, yeah.
Caste, okay. So what are the different articles, different rules and regulations for the different caste systems? Can we finalize into all systems and one caste? Can we make any bills or any rules and regulations into all the students who have studied in universities or colleges? Can we make equal to only one caste after completing into their degrees?
I think the profession question, I think there are two ways of thinking about it. One is from an individual's education point of view. You ask yourself, what profession would you like to have? And that is, and there's nothing wrong with it, to a great extent, self-related thought, what John Stuart Mill would say, a self-regarding thought. On the other hand, there is also a question of what a profession would allow you to do, not in terms of earning a high income, but in terms of those things to which you feel committed. And if you are having the kind of model I was discussing, your choice of the career may well be influenced by that. I think there's nothing wrong in giving legitimacy to both concerns, and nothing extraordinarily, there's no extraordinary failure if there are lots of people who gave no concern to the second at all, only to the first. I'm not arguing for a world in which everyone feels socially committed. I think I am arguing for a world when everyone wants to know what the ground realities in the society are, what the situation of Dalits are, what the situation of the scheduled tribes are, what the caste divisions in India are. But that doesn't prevent you from becoming a cosmologist or a grammarian or a philosopher or a logician. I think there's a distinction. So I think what we have to liberate is the idea that a profession defines a person. Because a profession is how you earn your income, what work you can do and you do well. But that doesn't prevent you from listening to music, from talking about politics, from voting, from agitating, from arguing with others. And I'll come to the debate question, debating with others. So I think the professional thing should be put in its place rather than made into a very central question. Now, the government has to think about whether they're training enough doctors, enough engineers. Yeah, that's some subject called manpower planning. And I have actually done that many years ago. I had to go to Bangkok. I was there for 2 months giving some lectures. And there was some manpower meeting going on, and they wanted me to come. I had not worked on that before. But I went there, and since the work I was doing for the UN proved to be exceedingly easy, I had lots of time left. So I became for a while a manpower planner. And for many years I kept on getting letters from the Manpower Planning Society. And even one letter saying that there is going to be a discussion here on the subject of the inequality in India. I know it is not on manpower planning, but if you still can take an interest, it would be very nice if you could come here. So I felt very flattered that I've become a specialized manpower planner. But even specialized manpower planners can take an interest in inequality in India. I think we have to, this is the subject matter of my book in Identity, called Identity and Violence, that there's nothing remarkable in the fact that we all have many identities. This is a very important issue in every question. Profession is one way of defining us. And sometimes that could be a limitation, if it is the only one that's emphasized. Just as sometimes we could be classified as Hindus or Muslims or Sikhs. And sometimes that could be a terrible way of classifying people because it denies our humanity and our many common interests, including in profession, in literature, art, language, and everything else. Similarly, sometimes we could be defined in terms of caste. And yet we could transcend that. And if you think about a name that I already mentioned earlier, Ambedkar, you think of him as a Dalit leader, as a person who presents a very cogent argument for Buddhism as to why Buddhism had a message which India had not fully absorbed yet, who also is one of the makers of the Indian Constitution. India went on for affirmative action before any other country in the world, to a great extent because of Ambedkar's ability as an Indian citizen to work in that respect. So I think we have to just take the professional question seriously in its context, but not demand our human identity only in that term. Now, on the subject of what is it, dialogue and debating and argument. Debating and argumentation are rather close, actually. You have to accept that. Because if I'm debating you, I'm arguing with you, right? But when we dialogue, it's not just arguing, it's also sometimes agreeing. That's how movements are made. When Mahatma Gandhi came back from South Africa, one thing clearly, as we can see from his own autobiography, he had learned, is that the power of making a whole group agree that there is a violation, just as the Dalit movement requires that. The Dalit identity should not be confined only to being a Dalit. That would be a terrible mistake. On the other hand, the Dalit identity may be very important for fighting some injustices. And so I think, so dialogue is not just arguing, not just debating. It's also agreeing. And that's a very important part of what happens. If you think about the big agitations which make changes, including right now the agitation going on about the treatment of women. It's the agreement and understanding. If I may take on the women's issue as a point, it's extraordinary how that issue remained dormant for such a long time. And now, of course, in almost every rape case, it gets into the newspaper in a way that it used not to. It turns out, in fact, in terms of officially reported rape in India, India is actually, if India's rape rate is about 2 or 3 a year, that in England and Britain, Germany, France, Sweden, etc., I presented in a paper in the New York Review called Indian Women, the Mixed Truth, that there are about 26, 35, 40, many times. Even if we are underestimating by a factor of 10, the actual rape cases may be still lower than elsewhere. The problem isn't that. It's just that the suspicion of a rape could get attention in a way in other countries which India didn't. So that's why the Burma Committee was so important, because they made that possible. And that, as you know, if you read the papers, how it has become a bigger issue. But there is a caste issue and a class issue there too. Dalit women have been raped day in and day out without getting the kind of agitation that Nirbhaya's treatment got. Now, that agitation was an enormously important thing. So I salute it, I join that. And yet I would have to ask the question, why is it that Dalit women's rapes are not covered by the media in the same way? I think we come back again and again to the same question. What are we discussing? What are the truth of the matter? There's also a bifurcation in India, by the way. If you go by both rape rates, for example, Delhi has 9 times the rape rate that Calcutta has. And if you look at the sex-specific abortion of female fetuses, India splits into 2 halves. All the northern and western states have way below European ratio, indicating female abortion, female fetus abortion, and all the eastern and southern states are well within the European range. I've stated that it came out in the New York Review. There have been a debate on that. I haven't seen any Indian paper cover this at all. So I think it's extraordinary that how the informational limitation remains a factor, and that's where the other part of dialogue, not just argument, but knowing from each other what's happening becomes important. So thanks for asking that clarificatory question. And on the subject of caste, I think caste has been such an evil in India that what is remarkable is not so much that it's proving so hard to get rid of, but what is remarkable is that why that battle took so long to get engaged in. It wasn't as much a part, I mean, I know that Mahatma Gandhi did talk greatly about untouchability issue, but the whole issue of taking up the caste question as an evil, defining human beings in terms of how they are born, is a way of denying people's humanity that I don't think our nationalist readers fully fathom. Now, that's becoming a bigger issue. It can become a further bigger issue too. And that's why I'm particularly keen that the Dalit movement follows the Ambedkar line of educate, agitate, organize. And I think this is important. It's important for that to become a major voice. And if you look at the newspapers, you will not get the impression that Dalits still don't get the kind of treatment of scheduled tribes. Don't. We studied, for example, the editorial staff, Zoe and I did, Zoe did mostly. I have a lovely partner relation with Zoe whereby he does 90% of the work and I get 90% of the credit and blame too. But he did most of it. We couldn't find among the editorial group a single Dalit, not to mention single scheduled caste, in any of the major papers. Very rare. I think he was looking only at Allahabad, admittedly. But I think there's a deep asymmetry. But an editor doesn't have to be Dalit to take an interest in this issue. People have taken an interest in this issue beyond their own orbit of birth. But we have to put that issue for dialogue, learning from each other, and debating each other and arguing as to why do you say that? Why do you say that the Dalit issue isn't so big? It is big, and what's your argument again? And if we are worried that some leader may terrorize or drive fear in the mind of minorities like Muslims, we have to, why is it that the people who want to save business progress don't see that there is a problem here? There's a genuine issue of engagement involving all the arms of the dialogic process, namely talking with each other, discussing things, arguing with each other, debating with each other, and ultimately agitating about it in an informed way. So thanks for these lovely questions.
Sir, you have been accomplished in the early part of your life in India, then UK, then USA. My question is, starting from the President Pranab Mukherjee's worry that nobody in India after Raman has been able to get a Nobel Prize by working within India. So, would you like to suggest what should the higher education system do to come up? For example, when there is a list of 100 institutions, India does not appear there. So, there is something wrong somewhere. What is your opinion about what should the higher education system do?
Given the importance given to Ambedkar and his ideas on equality as a right and as a force and establishment of equality in difference and thereby establishing justice, how do you analyze the institutional implementation of justice as a distributive principle?
Sir, I am a sociology student. I would like to ask one question, sir. Neoliberal India is facing two models of development. One is neoliberal model of development, and another is the Jantar Sarkar model of development for the tribals and Dalits. For which one you would like to choose in this two model of development? And the other thing, you have given lecture on coffee houses. JNU has witnessed the breaking of Nescafe coffee house. It means it is a re-embourgeoisement, if you put it in a Habermas terminology, it is a re-embourgeoisement of coffee houses. Does India middle class has this the space for dialogue and talk? Kindly reflect on this, sir.
I am very much fond of the idea of informed public discussion in the modes of agitations. And also the principles which you have told on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Sir, at the same time, how can we put the point when institutions fail to engage in the informed public discussion? Sir, I am referring to this in the context of the movements which are going outside and also the policies which are being framed. Sir, in the context of inclusive growth, a debate on inclusive growth which has been generated in the 11th five-year plan, there has been a mention about land reforms. On one hand, there have been movements which have been going about land reforms, but as an institution, the institution doesn't recognize the movements. It doesn't communicate with the movements which are going on at the ground level. So how can we understand the institutional failure and also the leadership which kind of deliberately what do you call, like suppresses the genuine movements? There the question of informed public discussion doesn't hold. So your answer, please.
Let me move from the reverse order of the question. So I'm glad we agree that informed public discussion is important. If you feel that informed public discussion is not taking place, what you have to do is to demand that. Now, I'm not going to comment on the style of the demand, which was an issue that came up earlier in the present context. But you have to demand it, and that is what really democratic dialogue is about. And you know, one of the advantages of living in a democratic society is that basically we are able to express our views with the force that is needed. I think it's very odd when in our book, when we found that China was in many areas doing enormously better than India, despite not having democracy. It wasn't so much to say that it's democracy's fault, but it's our fault that we have not been able to use democracy for the purpose for which it could be used. Everything that has been made into a public concern, a big public concern, shared public concern, and even if it is an issue about Dalit, it could be a general public concern, it becomes a success. Let me illustrate. A long time ago I said, in an article, it was actually a popular article in New York Review, said that famines do not take place in a democratic, functioning democracy. How does that happen? Now, it's because famines are easy to prevent, and the government is forced to act if people want it. How many people are threatened by famine? I spent about 15 years studying famines across the world. I think there's hardly any famine about which I don't know something. About many of them I've written. I don't know any famine which killed more than 10% of the population. Mostly they kill about 2 or 3, maybe 5%, and hardly any famine which affects more than 15% of the population. That's a minority. How come that voice is so strong in democracy? It's because the deprivation of the famine victims, and the same thing could apply to Dalits or the scheduled tribes, could become a shared concern if we succeed in making the point through informed argument. Lot of the things that are denied, whether it's saying that Dalits don't get such a bad treatment, or scheduled castes, they're doing fine, I talk with them, they're very nice and very happy. And similarly, about other issues, in this case, could have been people regular undernourishment. It doesn't get any kind of attention. But famine, it got very politicized, partly connected with the nationalist movement, because the British Empire was born in a famine, 1770, and died in a famine in 1943. So it became something where the government had to do something, and as a result, famines disappeared. We were told not long ago that India was going to be the center of AIDS epidemic in the world, dwarfing all other countries. It became a major issue. There were a lot of books. I even wrote an introduction to a book by novelists, really, fiction writers. And it became a big issue. And now no one really counts India as among the highest AIDS population, AIDS mortality countries. In fact, even the official estimate of the UN, which is lower, much lower than was anticipated and lower than most countries, it turns out that in a recent study by Prof Amartya, based on actual mortality background check, that we underestimate the death from malaria, but we overestimate the death from AIDS. It's about a quarter of the actual number that the UN does, which is already low. What happened? It was politicized. It became clear after the debacle connected with the tsunami that the government did not act sufficiently quickly and well. So when we had recently a hurricane, which was 5 times the size of Katrina, the government was able to move 1 million people off the coast, so that the mortality rate, instead of being in thousands, as in many of these hurricanes across the world, ended up between 10 or 15. So this is an important point to recognize. Things happen if we demand it. But we have to demand it in an informed way. The reason why Ambedkar wins every time is that educate, agitate, organize is the combination that we want. So that's the way I would deal with your question. Now, on the subject of neoliberals, you know, these terminologies actually hide as much the process of thinking as they do, because what you do is that you use one word and then try to capture a complex reality in terms of that one word. There are big differences between people who want a market economy and people who want a market economy only. Sometimes I've seen neoliberal used to apply to Adam Smith, who was arguing, as I said, that the government has to do its job and it's really very important. So I think the right way of thinking about it is not neoliberal, socialist, or whatever you have, but to say what are the institutional combinations you're looking at. And you have to see whether the institutional combination is right. Take China, it's a very interesting case. During the Maoist period, they were not only not neoliberal, they're ferociously non-neoliberal. So they didn't give any room for a market economy. However, they educated people in schools, not very good schools, but pretty much everybody, and they had health care for all, not very good health care, but for all. Never a situation like in India. But since the market was so badly neglected, the economy of languishing. China's per capita income was lower than that of India's then. Then came 1979, and then there was a wholesale change. A one-label anti-market was replaced by pro-market. Marketization in agriculture did an enormous amount of good. The Chinese agriculture grew faster every year for a decade or more than any country in the history of the world. And the bulk of the poverty removal happened then. The industry did pretty well on the market, though there are room here to debate on that subject a little bit. Where it did not work well at all was when the Chinese privatized healthcare. Suddenly, instead of having universal insurance, you had to buy your health insurance. Instead of 100% coverage, China ended with 12% coverage. And the Chinese life expectancy, which was growing rapidly, was 14 years ahead of India's in 79 at the time of reform, started languishing. China had moved rapidly to 68. And in the following 25 years, when China was having the fastest rate of growth in the history of the world, it proceeded only 3 years, from 68 to 71. India even caught up. The gap, instead of being 14 years, became 7 years. Then the Chinese suddenly recognized that what had gone wrong is the formula that either you're pro-market or anti-market. Market works brilliantly in some areas, but not so brilliantly at all in other areas. As Adam Smith said, the state has to do those things which only the state can do. And then in a rapid move beginning in 2004, they changed. By now they have 96% covered. And the Chinese life expectancy is again galloping forward compared with India. Not higher than Kerala still. That's because Kerala already had the healthcare system of the kind that the Chinese are practicing. And indeed, the Kerala's growth rate itself, as I discussed earlier, has been quite remarkable. Not quite the Chinese, but very much higher than any other state, including Gujarat and Maharashtra. So I think we have to try to wean ourselves away from binding up our thought in this terminology like neoliberal. We want, whatever it is, it has to be some form of capitalism, or what we want is socialism. These words have a clear meaning, and in particular debates, yes, they do have a meaning, and they signify something, and I'll tell you a story on that in a minute at the end of it, but I don't want to get into the story yet. But that's what I would say about that try to think about, break down your thought as to what policy do you actually want. You said something about coffee house and JNU. I don't know the story. And remember, I didn't give my coffee house lecture anyway. No. So there was the institute question that somebody asked. I think institutional combination is very important, but human movement, including agitation, including discussion, including debates, are important because the institution can never take place of that. India has a democratic system. There's no reason why the grievances of the most deprived people, whether they be Dalit or of the very poor or women, and if you happen to be a Dalit, be poor, and a woman, your chances are very limited indeed. Why is it that these interests do not receive the attention as in a democracy it should? Well, I think what's failing is not the institution. It's our ability to make use of the institution for the purpose for which they were devised. And that's one of the points that Ambedkar made. We have got an institutional setup, but none of this will actually, that's the context he's making the remark, would work and achieve without the absence of educate, agitate, and organize. So I think institution, yes, we'll look for it. I have a book on that called The Idea of Justice, where I discuss that issue, what institutional combination, how it relates to human agitation and human discussion. So I will refer to that. Now then there was a question about Nobel. Now I'd never comment on Nobel actually. It wasn't that I was unhappy that I got it. I think my life would have gone fine even if I didn't get it. I was terrified when the news came because I had flown the night before in Concorde. In those days, Concorde was still flying to New York because there was a memorial meeting for Mahbub al-Haq. My friend was just died. And I was speaking in the memorial meeting. So I arrived, went to bed about 12, and then 5 o'clock, they were ringing up because it's 11 o'clock in Stockholm. And of course, you think that something has happened to the children, because at middle of the night, and so when I picked up, and they said, this is the oil, and I thought that, could be a motor accident or what. And so when they said, this is the Royal Swedish Academy speaking, my first thought wasn't even Nobel. It was that it couldn't be any children, because somehow it couldn't come by the Royal Swedish Academy. And then it occurred to me, it must be it, isn't it? And then it was. But then, of course, it's a bit terrifying, because they don't tell you. First of all, they read the preamble, bearing in mind the will of Alfred Nobel. And they've gone on. And then when it dawned on me, I was very tempting to say, come to the subject. But then, and then ultimately they did come to the subject. And so I had to talk about my work, and I also perhaps add a story there too, that when I went, I think I went to CNN or CNBC, which had hooked up with the Indian television. Naturally, that was what I wanted to talk to. So I went there. There was a Swedish gentleman with a camera on his back, and he said, I have to interview you for 5 minutes. I said, well, I'm supposed to be here. No, they're setting up the stage for you. I would ask you only 5 minutes. And as we were walking, he said, I'm very surprised, Professor Sen, that you got the Nobel. So I said, well, I don't think that's a terribly nice thing to say. First thing in the morning. And he said, no, I have all your books. But I thought these bastards will never give you the prize. So that pleased me, that at least some people thought I deserved it even before. And indeed, there were more people losing money on betting on me for 3 years preceding that. So in some way they were blaming me, saying, why aren't you getting the prize? Because I've lost, there's this lottery, you put in $1, and then if you get the winner, then it's divided between the winners. So people have been losing money. Kaushik Basu, my student, said that for 5 years he lost money on me. And then in the year I got it, he did not invest in me. I told him that that's what good economics is like. But I ought to say, and this is a serious point, that in concerning the presidents who are concerned, the papers for which, they added at the end other things, but the first 2 pages are all about my work that was done in the Delhi School of Economics. That was entirely about social choice theory. The first paper cited even those who said that first time a non-mathematical work is being honored. Well, the first paper was called, that the cited is called Necessary and Sufficient Conditions for Binary Consistency of Majority Decision. Not exactly a non-mathematical title. So, but that was all done in Delhi School of Economics. That was jointly done with Prashanta Patnaik. I had terrific students in Delhi School of Economics. And I think my work in social choice theory wouldn't have gone at all like that. And in fact, between us, between my student, me, and others working with us, we transformed the subject. But that began in the Delhi School of Economics. So that I would like to emphasize. I don't think I have time to tell the story about identity. So I think I was going to leave it here. But thank you very much.